The Last Duel, a true story of crime, scandal, and trial by combat in medieval France is a 2004 book by American author Eric Jager about one of the last officially recognized judicial duels fought in France. In 2021, director Ridley Scott adapted the book as a movie called The Last Duel. Plot. While the plot of The Last Duel is portrayed in 3 separate chapters, each telling the same story from the perspective of the 3 main characters, the following description summarizes all 3 presentations into a single thread. After serving in the Caroline War, French squires Jean de Carouges and Jacques Legris swear allegiance to Count Pierre d'Alençon, who has been named Jean's overlord by King Charles VI. Jacques later tells Jean that Pierre has tasked him with collecting war levies, agreeing to ask for leniency on Jean's behalf when his brother-in-arms explains he lacks the funds. To restore his finances, Jean marries Marguerite de Thibouville on the promise of a large dowry from Marguerite's father, Robert, that grants the rights to many valuable estates. Pierre, however, seizes the prized estate of Aole Faucon to settle Robert's back taxes and gifts it to Jacques, who has earned a court position by using his accounting knowledge to organize Pierre's finances. Jean takes the matter before King Charles, who dismisses the suit. Pierre retaliates by appointing Jacques to the captaincy of a Carouges family post following the death of Jean's father. Jean's marriage becomes strained due to the couple's failure to conceive. He and Jacques reconcile at a celebration, where Jacques becomes smitten with Marguerite after she befriends him in an attempt to win favor. Jacques misinterprets this as a reciprocation of his affections and suspects she does not love Jean. Following a defeated military campaign in Scotland that sees him knighted for his efforts but still bankrupt, Jean sets off for Paris to collect his wages, leaving Marguerite to manage the estate in his absence. One day, Jean's mother takes all the servants to attend to legal business, leaving Marguerite alone. Jacques later visits and tricks his way into the chateau, haughtily proclaiming his love. When he ignores Marguerite's orders to leave, she attempts to flee from his advances, only for him to chase her to her room, and despite her protests, he rapes her before ordering her not to tell her husband. Upon Jean's return, Marguerite tells him what happened. After questioning whether she is telling the truth, Jean becomes convinced that Jacques raped Marguerite to insult him specifically. Jean insists that Marguerite immediately have sex with him so that Jacques will not be the last man that knew her. Pierre informs Jacques that Jean is accusing him of raping Marguerite, which he denies. Despite the Count's attempt to exert his authority, Jean appeals his case directly to King Charles and requests a duel to the death. Jacques accepts, having decided not to seek a favorable form of a Catholic ecclesiastical court with clerical judges. Marguerite's friends abandon her, believing her to be lying to cover up an affair, while Jean's mother insists Marguerite drop her accusations and accept any consequences. At Jacques' trial 6 months later, a now pregnant Marguerite remains resolute that she is telling the truth, while the court implies that Jacques is the father of her child. Charles grants Jean's request for a duel to the death to determine the case. Marguerite is also informed that she will be burned alive for perjury if her husband loses. Marguerite confronts Jean for not telling her she would be burned alive if he fails. Marguerite gives birth to her son not long before the duel takes place. The duel begins with Jean and Jacques justing until both men lose their mounts and fight hand to hand. Following a lengthy struggle, Jean is stabbed in the groin but eventually manages to pin down Jacques. He demands that Jacques confess or face damnation, but Jacques claims his innocence. Jean then kills him. Jean basks in the glory of his victory while Marguerite follows quietly behind. Meanwhile, Jacques' body is stripped, and hung upside down publicly. A textual epilogue reveals Jean died fighting in the Crusades while Marguerite continued managing his estate, living in peace for the remainder of her life but never remarrying. Cast. Production. Development. The project was initially announced in July 2015, with Francis Lawrence planning to direct the film, and Sean Grant writing the screenplay. No further development was announced, and the film rights lapsed. In July 2019, Deadline Hollywood announced that Ridley Scott was planning to direct the film, with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon set to star as well as write the screenplay with Nicole Holofcener. With Walt Disney Studios holding the rights to the film as a result of the Disney-Fox merger, it was unknown if the company would produce the film owing to its subject matter. However, Deadline Hollywood added that every studio in town was waiting in the wings should Disney sell the rights. In September, Jodie Comer entered negotiations to join the cast and was confirmed the following month, with Adam Driver entering negotiations to join the film after Affleck opted to play a different supporting role. Driver was confirmed in November, with Disney stating it would distribute the film by setting a release date. Harriet Walter was added to the cast in February 2020. Filming began on February 14, 2020, in Dordogne, France and continued until March 12, 2020, in the medieval castle of Briz-le-Châtel, Burgundy, France. Filming was to have taken place in Ireland, using locations at Bective Abbey, County Meath, and Cahir Castle, County Tipperary and various locations across Dublin and County Wicklow from March 23, 2020, to March 30, 2020. On March 13, 2020, Disney announced that the studio had to delay the shoot indefinitely amid concerns for the cast and crew in light of the COVID-19 pandemic as well as travel restrictions in Europe. Filming resumed in late September 2020 and production concluded in Ireland on October 14, 2020. Release: The Last Duel was originally scheduled to begin a limited theatrical release on December 25, 2020, before going wide on January 8, 2021. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the release date was delayed to October 15, 2021. It had its world premiere at the 78th Venice International Film Festival on September 10, 2021. The film played exclusively in theaters for 45 days before it headed to digital platforms. Home media. The film was released on digital platforms and premium video on demand on November 30, 2021, and on Blu-ray, DVD and Ultra HD Blu-ray on December 14, 2021, by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment. The Last Duel became available for streaming on HBO Max on January 14, 2022. According to the streaming aggregator Just Watch, The Last Duel was the second most watched film across all platforms in the United States, during the week ending January 16, 2022. Reception. Box office. The Last Duel grossed $10.9 million in the United States and Canada and $19.7 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $30.60 million in the United States and Canada. The Last Duel was initially projected to gross around $10 million from 3,065 theaters in its opening weekend. After making $1.8 million on its first day, including $350,000 from Thursday night previews, estimates were lowered to $5 million. It ended up debuting to $4.8 million, finishing fifth at the box office and marking the worst opening of Scott's career. Deadline Hollywood attributed the underperformance to the 2.5-hour runtime limiting the number of showings, the subject matter being hard to market, the 45-plus age demo not fully returning to theaters yet, and competition from Halloween Kills and No Time to Die. Several publications labeled the film a box office bomb, and noted that 20th Century would likely lose millions on it. It fell 55% in its second weekend to $2.1 million, falling to 7th. The third weekend saw a drop of 78% to $558,000, for a domestic gross of around $10 million. During an interview on the podcast WTF with Mark Maron in November 2021, Scott blamed the film's box office failure on millennials, saying, "I think what it boils down to what we've got today, the audiences who were brought up on these effing cell phones. The millennials do not ever want to be taught anything unless you are told it on the cell phone.